You are listening and watching to a special edition of Open Bar on Tequila Aficionado Media on all of our platforms. I'm Mike Morales here in the heartbeat of the San Gabriel Valley. That gentleman out there is
Charles Durazo. Nice to meet you, Mike.
Charles. Thank you. Nice to meet you too, and thank you for being here with us on Open Bar. For you folks who are maybe new to everything, if you have a special bottle, chances are, if you're watching this show, you are probably a collector or a connoisseur or just getting into tequila, and someone has said to you, Clase Azul. You gotta try Clase Azul. You see the ceramic blue bottle. I wish I had one with me. I have one in storage in my garage, believe it or not. It was a gift somebody gave me. And if you have one, you know what I'm talking about. It's blue, it's white, with blue paint on it. It's just beautiful. Some people make lamps out of it. Some people collect it. Now it comes in black and it comes in pink and it has a storied background. And Charles here is one of the original founders of Clase Azul. So when I found that out, I said, I got to have this guy at Open Bar. So welcome in, Charles.
Thank you, Mike.
Tell me a little bit about your background and how you came to be involved with Clase Azul. It's got to be over, what, 20 years, close to that?
Yeah, I got involved with a friend of mine, with Juan Sanchez. We were one of the original three partners for Tequila's Premium, which was the importer for the Clase Azul brand in the United States. So it was an easy decision to be in the tequila business. My parents, or my dad, was actually born in Mexico, as were his brothers, and so I've always actually wanted to be in the tequila business. Didn't ever think it was going to happen, and he presented it to me, and we were able to do that. So have about a little less than 12 years of experience in the tequila industry. Sold wine for a couple of years. Also did a lot of software. I got something like 15 years of software experience, and believe it or not, I used to do some stand-up comedy and improv comedy in LA, down where you are, and up here in San Francisco as well. More improv up here and more stand-up down there. But kind of the three areas I've been in. But they've all been fun, all been different. So
when are you going to host Saturday Night Live?
I wish I could. I mean, again, those people are so talented, really. Even in the down years, that it's a lot of. The one thing I learned about being in comedy is you don't really get discovered. Sometimes they say, "Oh my God, I found this guy. He's so funny." What'll happen is someone that's important will see your set and you'll be funny, but then they'll go back, 10, 12 times, and you have to be funny 10, 12 times, and then someone will talk to you. So it's a lot of hard work. I got some friends that still do it, but I definitely, gave it my best shot, but I don't think I was very close to Saturday Night Live.
Well, you have I read your bio, your background on LinkedIn, because that's
what we do now. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you reached out to our other managing partner, Lisa Peach, and Lisa said, you got to talk to this guy. And I started looking back and I go, oh my God, because I told Charles off camera the story of how I met Arturo Lomelí, who is the master distiller of Clase Azul and still is. And I met him briefly once at the Old Spirits of Mexico show back in San Diego. I was a judge one year, and the previous year I was asked to moderate a discussion, a panel with other master distillers, and I realized then that how this was years and years ago. Before I think I was lucky to even have a sample of Clase Azul, because it was he was making it appear so rare, and he had a bottle and he was pouring it to everybody and literally tasting it to so many people, and he just a little bit.
Right.
And I realized then when I met him how passionate this guy really is. And now for those of you who are collectors of Clase Azul, you probably have not only his blue bottle, his black bottle, his pink bottle. And for those of you in the industry, you might realize that he's also now, after so many years in the industry, he's building his own distillery just to keep up with the demand. It's been one of the, is that how it began, Charles? Was it going to, did you even know it was going to take off the way it did as a sought after bottle and juice?
You know, in the beginning, actually, Arturo had the bottle. It looked a little bit different. For all intents and purposes, it was that white Talavera with the blue paint. He had I don't remember the name. He had a importer distributor in San Diego, small guy, maybe had 50 total brands, was maybe moving a few bottles a day. And Arturo, the master distiller, is a brother-in-law of Juan Sanchez, my business partner for Tequila's Premium, and was always, kind of always asking, Juan if he wanted to be into that business. And finally Juan said yes. And then me and him sat down and I said yes. And we knew that we could take that bottle and do something with it. That guy just in San Diego just didn't really know what he was doing.
Right.
And so that's kind of how it began. And we did some modifications to the bottle. But for most intents and purposes, it looks very much like it was in the beginning, the bottle.
Yeah, it's practically unchanged, and has become more and more sought after. The second time that I had the Clase Azul, it was served to me. I was on a road trip through Arizona, and I stopped to say hi to a buddy of mine who was a chef in one of the resorts in Phoenix or Scottsdale. And he said, "I'm going to take care of you. You order whatever you want. It's on me." And I said, "Great." And so he brought us out a steak. It was delicious. And then and with the steak, he paired it with Clase Azul. And I had not had it up until that point, in any significant amount. And I got to tell you, he brought out the Reposado, and I got to tell you, it was with a meat dish. It was delicious. It was really the perfect pairing. And he's one of our tasters. We on our Sipping Off the Cuff episodes, we have a series of like 8 or 9 tasters throughout the United States and the UK. And now he's one of our tasters in Phoenix. And I always really enjoyed it as a something you can pair very easily with food and dishes, and it doesn't necessarily have to be Mexican food. Was that?
We saw a lot of that when we first came out. You almost you see it coming around again. You pair it with spices or different ingredients, maybe a strawberry with some cinnamon. I've seen different people present it in various ways, but it seemed like it kind of fell out of favor, and they did it again. I mean, the thing about Clase Azul, it's very sweet on the finish. And so it makes sense that it would go good with something like, salty and meaty, kind of a pair. And in fact, at some point in the beginning, people would ask us strange questions. They asked us if we were adding, it's 100% blue agave, but people were asking us, because it almost had a powdered sugar finish. People were asking us, "Are you adding sugar to it?" And we would tell them, "No. We've had the formula tested just like everybody else." And so definitely had a sweet part to the finish, which would make it go well. And that was kind of done on purpose. The American palate, although that's changed. We're talking 2004 when we took over the brand. The American palate was very much sweet then. They've become more sophisticated now, and they understand that tequila has become a much more complex spirit than back then.
Yeah, I think back then, really, you guys and Arturo especially was blazing a trail, that others followed. Now you see other beautiful bottles. You see, you taste some of these tequilas that we get this year for our Sipping Off the Cuff episodes, and subsequently our Brand of Promise that we award every year. Right. We had the largest submission of tequilas, even during a pandemic. I mean, if you folks are watching this, we're filming this and we're taping this in December, and we're all quarantined in place again. Right. But these things, they're already in the pipeline, so there's no way to stop them. If you're going to launch and you were hoping 2020 was going to be a banner year for you, and then all of a sudden here comes March and everything comes to a screeching halt. We've seen brands where their marketing plan was geared, based on a celebrity, and then the celebrity is quarantined in place. So what happens to the juice? The juice still has to move forward. Right. And we found many of them that have been just, if they didn't have a celebrity or they didn't have a front man, they're still going to survive. And that's the way I see it. I think Clase Azul it was ahead of its time, and now it's really to the point where others are trying to follow.
You could probably make the case to Arturo that he's one of the people that in that industry that kind of created the push towards the super premium. I mean, we wouldn't have existed without Patron. Patron existed right around the time that Arturo was thinking about his formula to do this, and then so when we got there, it was able to do it. We were actually surprised in the beginning how there were so few brands back then. 2004, it was just us in 1941. Don Julio, and then we were surprised how we didn't see brands, really the expensive brands, really start to show up till 2008, 2009, which helped us in the beginning.
Yeah, I think the trend they call it premiumization in the industry. That trend, I think you guys were right at the forefront, and probably Herradura when they had Supremo, I think is their one high. It was like a $300 bottle of tequila, and at that point, like you said, there were very few. There were few and far between in that ultra premium segment. Now it's what's driving the market. So
are you familiar, Mike, with Casa Noble?
Yes. Oh yeah.
Yeah. So in the beginning, Casa Noble actually was our distiller for Clase Azul, and as we expected, we started to get too big for them.
Yeah.
And then so we had to move on. But in the beginning, in our first couple of years, same formula, but we were using Casa Noble's distillery production facilities until we got onto our feet. And so it's kind of cool to hear it come full circle now. Arturo, which I had not heard, sounds like he's building a distillery facility himself.
Yeah. When did you get out of the business, and why? Had you just had enough? I mean, this is a tough business to begin with. No,
I mean, we would have continued. There was, like I said, there was three partners. Me, John Hansen, Juan Sanchez were in Tequila's Premium and selling the brand. And at some point, John was our CEO and kind of the main sales guy. He decided to depart the company at that point. In 2015, and so that's when I left. That's when I left as well. Not really any reason other than it was kind of they were moving I think they really wanted to move the organization more to a lot of folks from Mexico. So you see now, if you look at that organization, a lot of their kind of executives that are in there are kind of more of a pivot to that. And I think that kind of goes back to what we talked about is. Arturo really wants to build this kind of community and not just build a company. So I think the people in there, kind of buy into that kind of way of looking at it.
Well, it's interesting. I on my very first trip to Mexico was one of those. It was actually the first. I call it the largest blind date I've ever been on because there were 35 of us who had never met. We all belonged to an online forum. Mm-hmm. And somebody organized the trip, and oddly enough, Casa Noble was one of the first ones that we went to. La Cofradia. But I remember going to one of the distilleries on this itinerary. It was a 3-day packed with distilleries. I mean, it was before trips became a thing. Now, tourism and trips.
Right.
There was no tourism. There was no trail of tequila or anything like that there is now. And I got lost in a distillery warehouse, if you can call it lost. I was really happily lost. Mm-hmm. And this distillery was known for its ceramic bottles. And I remember looking at these and I go, oh, they have to be handmade, because that's what they look like. And if they were somebody's bar, the impression was that it was exclusive and that the juice was really good. And I'm looking through the warehouses, and some of the bottles, the boxes of bottles were in Chinese. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, it was just a real mind blower because when you present this what represents Mexico, and you think that everything is being made here and it's 100%, it has to be bottled there. And then you realize that the bottles are coming from Hungary, they're coming from China, and some of the iconic bottles, except for the one, the flagship. And what's nice is I guess Arturo has just completely done the reverse, where he really wants to keep it all Mexican, and his bottles were still handmade. And
well, we kind of had to, right? In order to make those Clase Azul bottles, you got to have your own oven or access to an oven. Those ovens run, retail about $600,000-$700,000. So he kind of had to. Now for a while, we had La Pinta, the pomegranate. Used tequila. Now, so we used to source our bottles, that bottle, because it's a standard bottle from China. But I think at some point we actually moved and then found a vendor in Mexico just because we didn't want to catch any flack from that. But the Clase Azul bottle, is definitely made in Mexico, just like the product, because it just has to. It's just the nature of that that product. I actually wonder how many ovens that they have now. If he's forming his own distillery, probably has several of those ovens now.
So you're what are you doing now? I understand you're kind of associated with a show on Amazon Prime or something like that.
Well, no, yeah. There's a group of people called the Three Drinkers, and they are UK drink experts. Helena, who is a wine expert, and Adi, who is a kind of a drinks and bar and lounge expert, and they have another guy, Colin Hamden White, who also is like kind of a whiskey expert. And so just to kind of in the meantime here, as I was, I'm now an advisor for another tequila brand, but I still am selling their sponsorship. So they had a very successful Amazon Prime show, and they actually were supposed to boot up season 2 here in Ireland, was supposed to have already been filmed, but COVID's continued to push it out. So their season 2 will still be in Ireland, but was selling to US brands that wanted to be a part of that show. They also have a podcast and a lot of content services. So they're really great, really kind of talented folks attached to them. And through them is how I got attached to Pancho Datos, which is a tequila brand that I'm now advising. They're in the UK now, and they want to come to the United States.
I have been after Pancho Datos for so long. I've actually communicated with, and I found my original information back in 2015.
Yeah.
He sent us the story of Pancho Datos, and apparently this has to do with a song his grandfather used to sing.
His grandfather, a musician and a writer, and there's a book that was written, and so this is his grandson, Luis, that is kind of doing the brand. So yeah, it's got a really great authentic story. The packaging, I think if you've seen it, I do not have a bottle because they are in the process of, in a COVID world, trying to get bottles to me. Yeah. Beautiful artwork in the bottle. They have really kind of a good branding already. They're actually way ahead of where we were in the Clase Azul La Pinta days as far as coming to the United States. So kind of exciting stuff.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it because I really have. Like I said, I communicated with him back in 2015. I still have his story. Mm-hmm. I know he's been doing great guns in the UK, and in Europe. So some of these brands that we solicit, some of them are only Mexico only, and they follow us on our social media, and that's how I become aware of them. And because there's so many brands popping up now, and like I say, we're in a COVID world, and it's just popping up all over the place now, so I hopefully they'll when they get to the U.S., we'll be able to acquire some bottles for our shipping off the cuff. The Amazon show, I've watched. They're really delightful people. They're really kind of fun to watch because they have the British humor, kind of comes through, and if you folks have ever seen it, called The Three Drinkers, they're everywhere.
The first season was in London and Scotland, basically going to distilleries. A couple of the episodes, they go to some of the clubs in London. London's got a very, I've never been, but I understand a very powerful lounge scene, very similar to San Francisco, New York.
Yeah.
Probably even more so, from what I understand.
What do you, as somebody who's been in and out of the business, you were gone for several years, and now you're back in. What kind of changes have you seen from? I mean, you just mentioned that Pancho Datos is way far ahead in their branding and bottling than you guys were. I mean, you guys started from scratch almost. Right. So what kind of changes do you see now in this industry that of course we talked about premiumization, but what else is there that you've noticed? Yeah, I mean, you are touching on it, and just this kind of crowding up of the brands. Back in 2003, 2004, the CRT came up with some regulation that said that, because back then there was hundreds of brands too, that said if you're not associated with an actual manufacturing facility, then your brand no longer exists. So that put the brands way down. That actually helped us. But now in this premiumization, like you're talking about, Mike, there's so many brands. So the biggest difference is just that you're just more looking over your shoulder as a premium brand. In our days, we looked around and there was no one around, right? So these days there's a lot more brands, and so in Pancho's case, you have to have a better story today. So what used to fly in 2003 and 2004 does not fly today. So if Clase Azul came out today, we'd have a different
different problem to solve, right? How do you create that niche? Because our belief was always that you got to have a niche in the tequila market, and I think that's really exists today even more so. Is if you don't have a niche, you're going to push up against a lot of brands. It can be as simple for new brands just to find a gap in the pricing. Where are the gaps today in the premium tequila? Where is that $2 or $4 gap, and maybe even try to hit that.
Do you find that do you find things more difficult now that, like you say, it's a kind of a crowded field, or do you still see that there's room for everybody? I like to say that when you go to a liquor store, you go to the tequila aisle, that you have not only 3, maybe 4 expressions, sometimes more than 4.
Right.
The expansion of lines, for instance, as well into margarita mixes and everything that's branded. So you try to expand your line, outwardly as opposed to going up and down, vertical, right, horizontal as opposed to vertical. Do you see that there's still room in the market, or do you see a shakeout and maybe some brands won't survive this COVID situation or the agave situation? I mean, we're still in an agave shortage as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say yes to all of those. I mean, it's still possible. You just have to execute a little bit better now. Like, you need to have a more solid packaging. Pancho has that. You need to have a more solid, I believe, story, an actual story, as opposed to maybe a story that is made up, right? Like we used to sell a brand called a Mixto brand. It's funny. It's kind of sad, the story of Mixto, how it became, almost became an outcast, and then it went down because we had a brand, a Mixto brand called El Teporocho. And we just couldn't get traction on it. People didn't see it as something that was a reputable brand. I kind of got on a sidetrack there because I had a note here to talk about Mixto. But in the early days,
that's good because I actually want to touch on
the early days. We tried to have a brand there, and it actually was pretty good. Like anything else, Mixto doesn't necessarily mean bad. I mean, quality in equals quality out. I mean, what is the added sugar that you're putting in, to your 51% agave? And of course, some of those Mixtos actually, 51% was the minimum. They could actually have a higher brand. I think our problem there was our packaging was just like, getting to the point where Pancho has this great packaging, is our bottles look like these little bandito guys with the long mustache and the pointy hats, and it wasn't cool. I mean, I remember, being the first one to be like, I'm not sure about these bottles. And so it kind of came full circle. That's kind of why when you were asking kind of off camera about the bottles, Arturo, the bottles are beautiful, but Arturo is going to tell you that it's about the juice. It's about what a master distiller can do to the juice to make it taste that good. Yeah, the bottles are beautiful, but, we always struggled with that. The bottles are beautiful is the icing on the cake. The product is a top 10, at that time. It's hard to say it now. At that time, it was definitely a top 10 best tequila in the world. Right. So we'd always fight the battle that the packaging is the extra. But those bottles in the beginning, that El Teporocho, those Mixto bottles, that didn't help us, right? So we also had to ditch that brand because there were so many brands in that $40 price point.
Well, I think right now, considering that we've been in this price crunch with agave, being skyrocketing, that the return of the of the Mixto, especially well-made Mixtos. I remember I lived, about 13, 14 years in New Mexico, and at the time, right when tequila started becoming popular, because I had actually one of the first tequila shows ever in New Mexico. I did it for 4 years before they became popular. And I remember going to the local liquor stores and not having a whole lot of money. And I would find these tequilas at $19, $20, and I picked one up, and not knowing the differences. Like I say, my palate wasn't as experienced now as it was now. So I picked it up. I took it home, had some, and I liked it. And I did some research on it. I back engineered and found out that it was a brand called Viuda de Romero, and that it wasn't 100%, that it was a Mixto. And in those days, the really good Mixtos were a 70-30 blend.
There you go. Yeah.
And I think now, it's again talking about coming full circle. I think Tequileño, the original Tequileño was always a 70-30 Mixto, and that was where the original Batanga, that was the expression that was used to make that batanga, which is Mexican Coke, and then the tequileño mixto.
Right.
And now it's becoming more popular, especially that we're in this.
Yeah.
We're still seeing this price crunch in Mexico about agave. So,
I mean, it was a U.S. marketing trend, and it caught so much wind that literally by the time you got to 2007, you'd be laughed out of a tequila show if you were trying to do a mixto. But El Teperocho was good. It was still put onto wood afterwards. I tell you what, it's better than El Jimador. It's better than Cazadores. Not that those are bad brands, but we would never do that. Now, if we were to bring a mixto back, it would not be in that bottle for sure. But it's interesting because in the book questions that you sent me, one of the trends I didn't talk about is there could be, just it kind of sparked me and you talking, is there could be a return to mixto. I mean, once again, that was very much how the Mexican market worked. It's kind of the Americans, very much who come in and try, we want to make money, so we changed it,
Yeah. Well, there's when you had the mixto, and at the time the trend was to go to 100% agave tequila, and people looked down at mixtos because the only mixto they understood was Jose Cuervo.
Right.
And everybody cut their teeth on Jose Cuervo. So Especial, which is the mixto, and then whatever they tried to do with, they tried to expand that line and it failed, and then they used it again. But I think there is a renewed respect for a well-made mixto being higher than 5149, which is the legal limit for a mixto. Right. The ones that people remember were about 70-30. I think Tequileño doesn't. They use piloncillo, which is I believe a brown sugar that some people make drinks with anyway. So
El Teperocho had kind of almost a little bit of a brown sugar kind of finish, a little bit. It had a unique taste. I actually haven't really found another brand that tastes exactly like it. I think it was 60-40 back in those days. But our story for that brand, is T48, El Teperocho. It was supposed to be a supposed story about during Prohibition, that you could go across the line, get tea for 8 cents, which was really, was alcohol. Now, that story was loosely based on a thing. And so my point being that in the poncho story, you have a real story. So I think that's necessarily true. And I think we also learned that in cutting our teeth in the industry. Clase Azul has a real story, as did La Pinta. El Teperocho didn't have a story. It was in a weird bottle. It was competing in a very crowded market, and it had a kind of a so-so story,
Do you find that stories now are more important to the new drinking public?
I think so. I think that people are just more discerning now. I mean, there was the premiumization, which we talked about, which people wanted, but now since there's so many premium brands, like you were talking later, is how do you differentiate yourself? Well, part of it is the story. You still try to create a niche. One way to create a niche is packaging. Another is the story. Another is your price point. You could do a combination of it. I think that if you're smart and you want to succeed today, you just don't go up against the heavyweights of the industry. Try to work your way around them in the beginning, like we did. And then there's a place. I think if you go in and try to go after the more successful brands and the more successful segments right away, then you're gonna have some problems.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many people say, I've done blind tastings against Don Julio and Patron, and they love people love my tequila. And right. I just last night, as a matter of fact, I was communicating with somebody with a brand new brand, and they said the same thing. Everybody's blind, but the friends and family, send them to me, okay? Because I will tell you, first of all, we won't even compare it, because comparison is that's a losing battle. That's where the big guys win all the time. As you said, you want to be able to blaze your own trail, find your own niche. Like you say, hit that sweet spot, between $2 and $4 between one brand and the other, and then go there, and then own that space. But yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that you were going up when you had your mixto, that you were going up against people were laughing at the brand and the mixto, because for the longest time, educators in the industry were pushing 100% agave tequila. It's the best, and it's all bottled in Mexico instead of bottled in the U.S. And it's
I mean the CRT in '74, like you've mentioned before, that also started this process.
Yes. Well, the thing was, it's like, geez, people still don't get it. But for you coming from the industry, you were saying I wasn't getting any respect for my mixtos. So somehow the education for the 100% part of the segment of the market really has been successful.
For sure.
I think
it's like the bottled water, the way they've got people to believe, almost to the point where they got people to believe bottled water was, safer than the municipal water.
Yeah, well, it's unless you live in Flint, Michigan.
Right. Other than Flint, Michigan.
What else do you see in the now that you're back into it? What new challenges do you see that you didn't have back then? Now you say the stories are important, so I guess what you're seeing more authenticity,
right?
And creativity with brands. But what other challenges?
Let's talk a little bit about mezcal, because I'm fascinated by the one thing I'm fascinated about mezcal is that I get it. It's part of I believe it's 5 types of agave plants you can make mezcal from, is because of the manufacturing process of it. They all are smoky. And on top of that, you see a proliferation. You guys are doing a lot of things on agave brands that are that aren't tequila outside of the United States. So I think it's really interesting in mezcal. What I would almost say is like something needs to give in mezcal. The flavor profile is so similar for all of the mezcals. I know that's changing. It's changed a lot in the last few years. It's almost like, is there a way to manufacture? Can you make a change to mezcal? But it's almost an ancient spirit. Maybe you can't. But I think that maybe there's some room there. There's some room for innovation in mezcal. In the same way that if mixto could come around, why couldn't mezcal change its flavor profile a little bit?
Well, I don't know. I can tell you, having been sent mezcals and bacanoras, and we taste everything, raicillas. Right. I can tell you that the flavor profiles all are different, and what it depends on is the plant. I think, for instance, in mezcal, if you can make it from those 5 different plants, and then there are some, some of these plants take years to grow, and so. What I've discovered is some of my favorite mezcals at higher ABVs, okay? Because a lot of them are coming in, they're just made with espadín, which is the core plant, and they're coming in at 80 proof. So they're trying to compete with that tequila. We call them gateway mezcals, because they're a gateway from tequila people.
Well, it's interesting you say that. So it sounds like, really like anything else, there's a bit of an education issue, even for me, like on mezcals. It's like the general public is probably not understanding, because even my understanding is like I haven't seen past that smoky profile. So it's actually great to understand that there are ones that have deviated from that.
Yeah, well, yeah, you need to. I think what's necessary is. And I don't want to dive into a big mezcal discussion.
Right.
Well, the reason is because it's going to take a little bit of education, and obviously you're concentrating on the tequila aspect of it. But some brands are beginning to look to expand their line. As I mentioned earlier, they're looking to have a Pancho Datos mezcal, maybe.
I mean, just from a consumer products perspective, I mean, if you've got 5 plants. And we've got worldwide consumption of agave plants. I mean, to me, the seeds of success are laid there for someone to come in. So you're right. We don't necessarily have to get into a hardcore discussion about mezcal. Maybe it's another type of agave spirit that exists in another country now. I don't know, but I know that if you want to extend the brand, like tequila's trying, right? They've extended all the way to extra añejo. And you've had tequilas that were pink. I had my thoughts about these pink tequilas, in Bordeaux cases or whatever. But tequila has reached a saturation point, and so now they're turning to mezcal, and I think mezcal's got really more potential. When you got 5 plants, and it sounds like from what you're telling me is one of the 5 is the one mostly used, and the other ones probably aren't even well known. And that's the other thing, is there's a huge education thing that needs to happen, because are all 5 of these agave plants, like of the 5, how many, this one's been 40% and this one's been 20%, and this is the flavor profile, and almost like CBD, right?
There's another, now we had this year an entry, a tequila line that was Oh my God, they invented categories for us. You know, they can't even compete with other
Right.
brands. Some of them, I have a mezcal from the same producer, a mezcal that is blended with matcha. It's delicious. We have a blanco tequila that's high proof, that's infused with salts. So in other words, it has electrolytes. This is all from the same brand. There is
Right.
a Cristalino mezcal.
Wow.
Never, you know, there's the Cristalino's another segment that tequila is beginning to go to,
Mhm.
and I, you know, I have my concerns about that, you know, that category. So yeah, when it comes to mezcal, for instance, because there's so many, there are a variety of plants that are available to be used.
Right.
Some people gravitate to certain flavor profiles that are provided by these plants. So some people prefer a tepestate
Mhm.
mezcal versus a cuichet,
Right.
or some of them only go for barrils. You know,
But in the same way, a master distiller can greatly affect the taste of tequila. These other
yeah,
distillers, they can do. I think that's the one point to get out is that a master distiller isn't just some title. You know, people think because it's tequila, it's like a master distiller can do things to extend the brand that you didn't even think were possible. You
yes.
know, i.e., how Clase Azul came out. You know,
Well, you know, we always say in mezcal, when we discuss mezcal, it's always the hand of the maker that counts, because even in the same region, you know, you have some. That's what's going on in mezcal, is that the families and master distillers are gaining popularity. Some people will only drink this guy's, you know, juice, and then there's
wow,
a guy who's at another village, maybe at a higher elevation or a lower
just
elevation.
like almost regional, like French wines or something, right?
Exactly,
Right.
exactly. It's really much more. I think when we talk about terroir, um, it's much more prevalent and perceived. It's much more. You can pick it out better in mezcals than you can with tequilas these days. It's
Mhm.
really getting tougher and tougher unless you're getting a tequila that's like Ocho, with single estate, that's coming from this huerta or from this rancho, and it's there's only one. They're leaning toward the vintage idea, you know, where uh, and then the collection, and then for collectors, you want to collect this vintage and the bottle from that vintage, and you want to have the whole line, and then you don't touch them, you don't drink them, you know, but
Right.
you get one to drink and one to preserve.
Right.
And I think that's becoming a thing now, that we're seeing, you know, when it comes to premium tequilas and premium again. A lot of people, the marketing, the word premium has been hijacked by marketers. What we mean when it comes to premium, it's a price point. It has
Right.
nothing to do with the quality. So when we talk about super premium, we're talking about that high end extra añejo, you know, aged
Yeah,
in sherry
and I don't
barrels.
know if you ever had that. Classy actually have that, and they still do. I mean, I think that's another big change that's happened in the industry is that we had an extra anejo. The bottle itself was worth about $500. The thing would retail for about $1,700, but it was really a brand promotion, and a lot of brands would do it. So every year we'd sell about 100 of these bottles.
Right.
You know, the agave medallion was, you know, a sterling silver. But now what you see in the industry is you see some of these premium brands, maybe not necessarily at $1,700 price point, but they're going into mass production at that price point. So that's a massive change that we see now that we didn't see before. So I think brands. I don't think you have to. Like, I don't know that Poncho has to have a $1,000 bottle or some kind of thing, but they will need some kind of special, I believe, at some point, some kind of special expression or something to push the envelope to help them, you know, penetrate the U.S. market because, it's like we talked about, there's so many more brands.
Yeah, and that segment of the markets was driving the market. Right now, in the middle of this pandemic, the you know, they talk about how tequila has the orders for tequila, the online orders, online retailers have the orders for tequila have skyrocketed. And but what happens during any crisis, is
Right.
that people they constrict, and they only order the brands they know. So
Right.
the only ones making money right now are guys, you know, the usual suspects. You know, that's Patron, Jimador. Every study you ever see that the companies try to sell you will always use them as the bar, as
Right.
the stage.
Yeah, they will survive, but like you're right, I don't even know a brand like Clase Azul. I'm not privy to the financials anymore, but I can tell you that that I don't know that a brand like that could necessarily survive a whole other year, or if this were to extend out into 2022, that brand, we could see brands fail. But you're right, these larger brands and what's in Clase's favor is they're in so many locations now.
Well, and the other thing too, I think at this point, Classic can be classified as a legacy brand,
right?
Because you started from scratch at the bottom before that category even existed. So you already exist. I mean, Clase Azul already exists there. So to amplify that line, that I guess that's a whole set of other challenges that do you find that you prefer working with fresher brands with a great story, and as opposed to somebody who's already established?
I mean, I don't necessarily have a set criteria. I like Poncho's bottles. The design is just outstanding. They're getting ready to come out with a mezcal. There was a company called Bombardier Design that was a winner of a competition that designed their mezcal bottle, and so it's a free design for them, and it's a beautiful design, Mike, really great. And so yeah, for that drew me in, their branding, and then kind of hearing the story. A lot of the guys are the main guy, Stuart, a guy working very hard in a very high pressure sales organization, kind of that romantic story. I want to do something that I'm in love with. I want to do something that's different from this corporate job, and the other entities that they have in there, are trying to live that dream too. So that's exciting. That kind of was, because that reminds me of what we were doing in the Clase days. And then, the product tastes good. Obviously that I like the product. So.
Yeah, well, I can't wait to taste it. Like I say, I've been hankering for it since 2015. So, I'm sure it's probably changed a little bit since then. The other thing I wanted to get, I want to touch base with you a little bit on your stand-up comedy. I thought that was there's one other gentleman in the industry. He is actually the I don't know if you know him or not, Marty Duffy, who is the Glencairn North American representative for Glencairn.
Okay.
Funny guy.
Yeah.
Extremely funny. And do you ever miss being on stage again? Do you ever get? I mean,
yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean that was a big part of it. The charge you get for being on stage, like you'd always be nervous. I think that's maybe a misconception about comedians, even the professionals. Like if you're not a little bit nervous backstage, then you got to wonder why. You're doing it. But yeah, it was fun to do that for sure. Met a lot of really talented people, but it was also pretty scary too in some cases, especially in the beginning. So kind of glad I did it to, if you can get on stand-up stage in front of people and perform for 5 or 6 minutes and have no one laugh, like I've had happen before, then you can pretty much do anything, Mike. I mean, you become a little hard to shake you if you can go through that experience.
I get this picture in my head that you open the refrigerator door and you do 20 minutes, right? The light goes off, boom, there you are. Who in the industry have you met that maybe we've heard of when it comes to comedy? I mean, can you even mention them, or is it not cool?
I mean, I can just probably tell you the coolest thing. I mean, the coolest thing I ever performed is in the beginning. The first time I ever performed was at the Comedy Store. So this is 2004. This is in Hollywood, across from Biscuit and Blue, or whatever the kind of the blues bar. Anyways, across the street. So you'd show up at like 6 o'clock with the other comedians, and you'd put your name in a hat, and they'd literally draw 20 names from the hat, and you'd get your 3-minute spot. And then depending on what time you drew, that's what happened. So the first time I got there and I drew. The show starts at 7 and it goes to 9. It's just a cavalcade of amateurs, right? You're in the kind of main room, which is a little bit intimidating because it's a round room and there's pictures of all the famous comedians, which you are not. Comedians all sit in the back, and comedians don't really laugh at each other's jokes. They actually don't like each other. I could tell you a whole story about that.
Wow.
But I drew a 7:04 slot, and Mitzi Shore, Pauly Shore's mom, is the owner of that club. She actually was in attendance, which was not normal. She was sitting in the back smoking one of those extended cigarettes, and I was backstage, and there was this piano player and an MC who I'd never met before, and it's just classic. And this next guy is a really good friend of mine. He's never met me.
Yeah. I
played the music, and I remember I was kind of hyperventilating backstage, and then up you go, and you're up there on stage in 3 minutes, and then that's how it started. And it was like, super exciting. And they still do that. Comedy Store still has that night where the amateurs line up and do it.
Wow. That sounds like when you present to like Southern Glaciers, when you start presenting to distributors, you got to do 3 minutes.
Yeah, well, as you know, the execs in those kind of companies, they live in a different world as well. So you got to be able to talk. You have to be able to talk that language a little bit.
Do you find that you like slipping into like a chameleon? You just kind of switch gears quickly, like on a dime, and is there anything that you learn in comedy that you can use when you talk to distributors and
Yeah, I mean, in the beginning when we talked to the guy, large people that were of importance at Southern or Glazers, or like it was kind of scary, or people that you met. Remember, there was a gentleman I met named Richard Canty who worked for Southern, that was in charge of the city of San Francisco, and he had such a deep voice that it'd make the hair on the back of your neck stand up. And John Hanson, who came from the industry, he knew what was going on. But me and Juan, I came from software and he came from banking, so we were just surprised at how executives behaved, what they said, how they behaved. And we got used to it and we learned. But I think that maybe improv and comedy helped you kind of roll with the punches, because the people just said things in meetings that we had just never heard before. They don't say those kind of things to bankers. They don't say those kind of things to software people, but they do say those kind of things in the alcohol industry. So I won't. I don't have to say what was said, but I get you get the.
Oh, come on, tell me! I want to hear it.
Right.
It's funny.
We just had to learn how that industry worked. Which was funny.
And that was in the early days. Now it's. I don't know if you've had a chance to present now to the current. Now these distributors have swallowed each other up. So it's. Right. It's like you only have two places to shop. You got Target and you got Walmart. So now you only got two places to distribute. You got National, you got Southern Glaciers.
Yeah.
And do you find that the swallowing up of each other does that make distribution easier or tougher for a brand?
I was phasing out. It was around 2015 that Glazers and Southern merged. Now, what I can tell you is that back in the early days, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, Southern they were brand builders. They put money in. They spent the time to build the brands. They have so many brands now. They're just really just a distribution network. Like, I don't know if you've ever been to the warehouse in Union City. I went to it maybe, 6-7 years ago. It's like a city within a city. It's like 8 football fields. There's like a highway of forklifts. And back in the beginning, we had maybe like 50 cases in there, and you'd show up and they'd be like, almost would laugh at you. Oh, you only got 50 boxes in here? And then some guy would drive away and under the forklift superhighway and bring you back your boxes of Class A Azul.
It sounds like the ending to
Indiana Jones, yeah.
Indiana Jones, yeah. They just put the arc way in the back, and then it pans backwards.
You can't see the back wall of the building. That's how big it is. Southern Wine and that was 8-9 years ago. Now with Glazers, I mean they're massive now. They're a huge company.
Yeah, I have no concept of that. I had worked very closely with Southern Wine and Spirits when I was doing my show, and locally in New Mexico is and still is, it's the land of the outlaw. They were really doing their own thing. They were left alone, yeah. And so I was able to forge relationships with the salespeople, the people who helped me get the show off the ground. And we were using, at the time, they had the largest portfolio of tequilas, and so it was really gratifying to be able to work with a company that saw the beauty of a show, because they'd never done it before. It had never been done up until that point. And so they said, yeah, this is a great idea. Why hadn't we thought of this before? So they were able to gain financial support from the brands that they were representing. We got paid. The customers had a great time. It was a beautiful. It was a great, 4 years, and then the atmosphere in New Mexico and in Albuquerque, where we were holding it, became a lot anti-alcohol, and they were telling me you need to get it out of Albuquerque and go someplace where it's more alcohol friendly.
Interesting.
And that's where things turned south, and I could tell that the industry was changing at that point. Mm-hmm. Sadly, the manager who was running Southern Wine in New Mexico committed suicide. Well, I don't know how that happened, because he was such a nice guy. And then Arizona, the office in Arizona picked up the management detail or New
I'm trying
Mexico?
to remember. Yeah, we were definitely in Arizona during my time. I think we signed on with New Mexico maybe later, towards the end of my tenure. I'm sorry to hear that about the gentleman in New Mexico. It is pretty high pressure. Maybe people don't understand the alcohol business. It's still a lot of long hours. They still wear suits. There's still a certain amount of drinking that is required as part of your job, which luckily wasn't necessarily my part of my job.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a high pressure job, as you can imagine.
Yeah, I can only I have no, I was in the back of their warehouse, and I used to work for a paper, food, and chemical distributor, so I know the size of what a warehouse looks like. But when you live in a state like New Mexico, it's not anything like what you were describing.
I mean, yeah, it was one of the coolest feelings of Clase Azul was, we only had a small warehouse space. Like I said, I don't know who is importing the product now, but we had a space in Hayward, 10,000 square feet, and we filled about 7,500 square feet of it. But the days when you could show up to the warehouse and there was so much Clase Azul product just sitting there was like kind of a cool thing. When you're in business trying to sell tequila, those days when we had the warehouse full was kind of a cool day to be at the warehouse.
What do you see now? If someone were to come to you and say, I want to, because I hear it all the time, even when I do consulting, I want to start my own brand,
Mhm.
and I feel for me, my job is to tell them, no, you don't want.
Probably not. I mean, it's different now, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, but I see, I see all all ends of the spectrum. I see people who come in with a dream, like I was talking to you about the gentleman last night who was telling me he had the people blind tasted it against everything, and it's the best thing in the world. And he's just and you don't want to shoot a guy down like that because they have a dream, and then you see other brands where it's just a corporation. There are 10 investors who are all in for 100,000, and the only thing that matters is the bottom line. And I want to see, I want to see a profit. I want to get something back for my $100,000. And what would you say to somebody who came to you and say, I want to start my own brand? What do you tell them? What do you say?
I mean, I would say a couple of things. One is, we never had to get money for Clase Azul. We never went out for money. The second thing is it's about pricing. Pricing is important because we're aware of brands that went under because they didn't do the simple task of doing the pricing for all the tiers, right? Producer to importer is a tier, importer to distributor is a tier, distributor, retailer to consumer. If you don't price it properly, you get priced out. The other thing that we did very well was making sure that our pricing was accurate, because when you start to negotiate with Southern and Glazers, they're going to beat you up on price. That's what they do, or like a Costco. So I'd say the first thing is make sure you got your pricing down. Do your research on what the pricing should be and how it is, and then secondly, think really hard about having investors. Prior to Casamigos, those guys, actually Randy Gerber and George Clooney, they approached Arturo. They had some conversations and some negotiations of possibly being investors in the Clase Azul brand before they started Casamigos. Of course, we would have, at the end of the day, you never know if having famous people as your business partners is a good idea. Now, I'm sure their current business partners are saying yes, but yeah, I mean, I think it was kind of a credit. We felt, like it was a credit that those guys were actually approaching Arturo and asking about buying the brand. It ultimately didn't work out, but it was a nice validation of the work that we did. People cared about the brand.
Wow, there's a behind the scenes story I knew nothing about. I have friends in Vegas that were telling me they were texting me, when right when Casamigos was coming into Vegas, and how that Clooney and Randy were in Vegas, and they were literally unloading. They were there to present to Southern Glaciers, I believe at that point it was the Southern wine, but it was a big deal because Vegas is again, Vegas is like this whole other country, when it comes to
right.
It's very transitory.
Right.
So
I mean, we couldn't talk about it. We'd signed a lot of things, a lot of NDAs. Like we couldn't talk about what went on with the brand. But the way that we were introduced to them, or the story that we were told, is that Randy and George Clooney were drinking bottles of extra añejo, the $1,700 bottles,
wow.
One or two at a time, and that's how they became interested in the brand. And then that's how they approached. My other business partners actually got to go to Malibu and visit Randy at his home, and we were all geeked up. This is around the time of that show Entourage was on,
right?
And they were telling us that if the brand did launch, that we were going to have a launch in Mexico City and a launch in Los Angeles, and we were going to be getting on some jets. And so, like, we were all geeked up. I loved that show at the time, and then we were trying to pinch ourselves to say, like, is this really happening? And so there was real negotiations that happened. And in the end, we walked from that deal. But like I said, there was no guarantee that just because they were interested that what happened to Casamigos would have happened to us. But it was still cool at the time.
Yeah, no, that's a great story. Do you feel? Well, I guess you already gave us your point of view on what celebrity investors are like. I don't
really know. I just make the point that just because those guys are famous and they're sitting across the meeting from me doesn't necessarily mean that they want to help the brand. I think ultimately we were afraid that they were trying to wrestle the brand away from us.